The Orange Revolution was a series of protests and political events that took place in Ukraine from late November 2004 to January 2005, in the immediate aftermath of the runoff vote of the 2004 Ukrainian presidential election, which was claimed to be marred by massive corruption, voter intimidation and direct electoral fraud. Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, was the focal point of the movement's campaign of civil resistance, with thousands of protesters demonstrating daily. Nationwide, the democratic revolution was highlighted by a series of acts of civil disobedience, sit-ins, and general strikes organized by the opposition movement. The protests were prompted by reports from several domestic and foreign election monitors, as well as the widespread public perception that the results of the runoff vote of the 21st of November 2004 between leading candidates Viktor Yushchenko and Viktor Yanukovych were rigged by the authorities in favor of the latter. The nationwide protests succeeded when the results of the original runoff were annulled, and a re-vote was ordered by Ukraine's Supreme Court for the 26th of December 2004. Under intense scrutiny by domestic and international observers, the second runoff was declared to be fair and free. The final results showed a clear victory for Yushchenko, who received about 52% of the vote compared to Yanukovych's 44%. Yushchenko was declared the official winner, and with his inauguration on the 23rd of January 2005 in Kiev, the Orange Revolution ended. In the following years, the Orange Revolution had a negative connotation among pro-government circles in Belarus and Russia. In the 2010 presidential election, Yanukovych became Yushchenko's successor as Ukrainian president after the Central Election Commission and international observers declared that the presidential election was conducted fairly. Yanukovych was ousted from power 4 years later following the February 2014 Euromaidan clashes in Kiev's Independence Square. Unlike the bloodless Orange Revolution, these protests resulted in more than 100 deaths, occurring mostly between 18 and the 20th of February. Background: Gongardze assassination, Kuchma-gate crisis. Georgy Gongardze, a Ukrainian journalist and the founder of Ukrainska Pravda, was kidnapped and murdered in 2000. Though no one accused Ukrainian President Kuchma of personally murdering him, persistent rumors suggested that the president had ordered the killing. This murder sparked a movement against Kuchma in 2000 that can be seen as the origin of the Orange Revolution in 2004. After 2 terms of presidency, and the cassette scandal of 2000 that ruined his image irreparably, Kuchma decided not to run for a 3rd term in the 2004 elections and instead supported Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych in the presidential race, against Viktor Yushchenko of the Our Ukraine People's Self-Defense Bloc. Causes of the Orange Revolution. The state of Ukraine during the 2004 presidential election is considered an ideal condition for an outburst from the public. During this time, Ukrainians were impatient while waiting for economic and political transformation. The results of the election were thought to be fraudulent and considered a nail in the coffin of the preceding events. Factors enabling the Orange Revolution. The Ukrainian regime that was in power before the Orange Revolution created a path for a democratic society to emerge. It was based on a competitive authoritarian regime that is considered a hybrid regime, allowing for a democracy and market economy to come to life. The election fraud definitely emphasized the Ukrainian citizens' desire for a more pluralistic type of government. The cassette scandal definitely sparked the public's desire to create a social reform movement. It not only undermined the people's respect for Kuchma as a president, but also for the elite ruling class in general. Because of Kuchma's scandalous behavior, he lost many of his supporters with high-ranking government positions. Many of the government officials who were on his side went on to fully support the election campaign of Yushchenko and well as his ideas in general. After a clear lack of faith in the government had been instilled in the Ukrainian population, Yushchenko's role had never been more important to the revolution. Yushchenko was a charismatic candidate who showed no signs of being corrupt. Yushchenko was on the same level as his constituents and presented his ideas in a non-Soviet way. Young Ukrainian voters were extremely important to the outcome of the 2004 presidential election. This new wave of younger people had different views of the main figures in Ukraine. They were exposed to a lot of negativity from the Kuchma gate and therefore had very skewed visions about Kuchma and his ability to lead their country. The abundance of younger people who participated showed an increasing sense of nationalism that was developing in the country. The Orange Revolution was impactful enough to interest people of all ages. Prelude to Orange Revolution. Late 2002, Viktor Yushchenko, Alexander Moroz, Petro Simonenko and Yulia Tymoshenko issued a joint statement concerning the beginning of a state revolution in Ukraine. The communists stepped out of the alliance. Simonenko was against a single candidate from the alliance in the Ukrainian presidential election 2004, but the other three parties remained allies. In the autumn of 2001, both Tymoshenko and Yushchenko had broached at creating such a coalition. On the 2nd of July 2004, Our Ukraine and the Yulia Tymoshenko bloc established the Force of the People, a coalition which aimed to stop the destructive process that has, as a result of the incumbent authorities, become a characteristic for Ukraine. At the time, President Leonid Kuchma and Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych were the incumbent authorities in Ukraine. The pact included a promise by Viktor Yushchenko to nominate Tymoshenko as Prime Minister if Yushchenko won the October 2004 presidential election. This 2004 presidential election in Ukraine eventually featured two main candidates. One was sitting Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych, largely supported by Leonid Kuchma, and the opposition candidate Viktor Yushchenko, leader of the Our Ukraine faction in the Ukrainian parliament and a former prime minister. The election was held in a highly charged atmosphere, with the Yanukovych team and the outgoing president's administration using the control of the government and state apparatus for intimidation of Yushchenko and his supporters. In September 2004, Yushchenko suffered dioxin poisoning under mysterious circumstances. While he survived and returned to the campaign trail, the poisoning undermined his health and altered his appearance dramatically. The two main candidates were neck and neck in the first-round vote held on the 31st of October 2004, collecting 39.32% and 39.87% of the vote cast. The candidates that came third and fourth collected much less. Alexander Moroz of the Socialist Party of Ukraine and Petro Simonenko of the Communist Party of Ukraine received 5.82% and 4.97%, respectively. Since no candidate carried more than 50% of the cast ballots, a runoff vote between two leading candidates was mandated by Ukrainian law. Later, after the runoff was announced, Alexander Moroz threw his support behind Viktor Yushchenko. The Progressive Socialist Party's Natalia Vitrenko, who won 1.53% of the vote, endorsed Yanukovych, who hoped for Petro Simonenko's endorsement but did not receive it. In the wake of the first round of the election, many complaints regarding voting irregularities in favor of the government parliament supported Yanukovych were raised. However, as it was clear that neither nominee was close enough to collecting an outright majority in the first round, challenging the initial result would not have affected the final outcome of the election. As such, the complaints were not actively pursued and both candidates concentrated on the upcoming runoff scheduled for the 21st of November. Activists were arrested in October 2004, but the release of many gave growing confidence to the opposition. Orange was originally adopted by the Yushchenko's camp as the signifying color of his election campaign. Later, the color gave name to an entire series of political terms, such as the oranges for his political camp and supporters. At the time when the mass protests grew, and especially when they brought about political change in the country, the term Orange Revolution came to represent the entire series of events. In view of the success of using color as a symbol to mobilize supporters, the Yanukovych camp chose blue for themselves. Protests began on the eve of the second round of voting, as the official count differed markedly from exit poll results which gave Yushchenko up to an 11% lead, while official results gave the election win to Yanukovych by 3%. While Yanukovych supporters have claimed that Yushchenko's connections to the Ukrainian media explained this disparity, the Yushchenko team publicized evidence of many incidents of electoral fraud in favor of the government-backed Yanukovych, witnessed by many local and foreign observers. These accusations were reinforced by similar allegations, though at a lesser scale, during the first presidential run of the 31st of October. The Yushchenko campaign publicly called for protest on the dawn of Election Day, the 21st of November 2004, when allegations of fraud began to spread in the form of leaflets printed and distributed by the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, announcing that Yushchenko had won on the basis of its exit poll. Beginning on the 22nd of November 2004, massive protests started in cities across Ukraine. The largest, in Kiev's maiden Nezalezhnost, attracted an estimated 500,000 participants who, on the 23rd of November 2004, peacefully marched in front of the headquarters of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, many wearing orange or carrying orange flags, the color of Yushchenko's campaign coalition. One of the most prominent activists of that time was Paraskar Korolyuk, subsequently bestowed with the Order of Princess Olga. From the 22nd of November, Pora undertook the management of the protests in Kiev until the end of the demonstration. The local councils in Kiev, Lviv, and several other cities passed, with the wide popular support of the constituency, a largely symbolic refusal to accept the legitimacy of the official election results, and Yushchenko took a symbolic presidential oath. This oath, taken by Yushchenko in half-empty parliament chambers, lacking the quorum as only the Yushchenko-leaning factions were present, could not have any legal effect. But it was an important symbolic gesture meant to demonstrate the resolve of the Yushchenko campaign not to accept the compromised election results. In response, Yushchenko's opponents denounced him for taking an illegitimate oath, and even some of his moderate supporters were ambivalent about this act, while a more radical side of the Yushchenko camp demanded him to act even more decisively. Some observers argued that this symbolic presidential oath might have been useful to the Yushchenko camp should events have taken a more confrontational route. In such a scenario, this presidential oath Yushchenko took could be used to lend legitimacy to the claim that he, rather than his rival who tried to gain the presidency through alleged fraud, was a true commander-in-chief authorized to give orders to the military and security agencies. At the same time, local officials in eastern and southern Ukraine, the stronghold of Viktor Yanukovych, started a series of actions alluding to the possibility of the breakup of Ukraine or an extra-constitutional federalization of the country, should the candidate's claimed victory not be recognized. Demonstrations of public support for Yanukovych were held throughout eastern Ukraine, and some of his supporters arrived in Kiev. In Kiev, the pro-Yanukovych demonstrators were far outnumbered by Yushchenko supporters, whose ranks were continuously swelled by new arrivals from many regions of Ukraine. The scale of the demonstrations in Kiev was unprecedented. By many estimates, on some days they drew up to 1 million people to the streets, in freezing weather. In total, 18.4% of Ukrainians have claimed to have taken part in the Orange Revolution. Political developments. Although Yushchenko entered into negotiations with outgoing President Leonid Kuchma in an effort to peacefully resolve the situation, the negotiations broke up on 24 November 2004. Yanukovych was officially certified as the victor by the Central Election Commission, which itself was allegedly involved in falsification of electoral results by withholding the information it was receiving from a local districts and running a parallel illegal computer server to manipulate the results. The next morning after the certification took place, Yushchenko spoke to supporters in Kiev, urging them to begin a series of mass protests, general strikes and sit-ins with the intent of crippling the government and forcing it to concede defeat. In view of the threat of illegitimate government acceding to power, Yushchenko's camp announced the creation of the Committee of National Salvation, which declared nationwide political strife. On 1 December 2004, the Verkhovna Rada passed a resolution that strongly condemned pro-separatist and federalization actions, and passed a non-confidence vote in the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, a decision Prime Minister Yanukovych refused to recognize. By the Constitution of Ukraine, the non-confidence vote mandated the government's resignation, but the parliament had no means to enforce a resignation without the cooperation of Prime Minister Yanukovych and outgoing President Kuchma. On 3 December 2004, Ukraine's Supreme Court finally broke the political deadlock. The court decided that due to the scale of the electoral fraud, it became impossible to establish the election results. Therefore, it invalidated the official results that would have given Yanukovych the presidency. As a resolution, the court ordered a re-vote of the runoff to be held on 26 December 2004. This decision was seen as a victory for the Yushchenko camp, while Yanukovych and his supporters favored a rerun of the entire election rather than just the runoff, as a second-best option if Yanukovych was not awarded the presidency. On 8 December 2004, the parliament amended laws to provide a legal framework for the new round of elections. The parliament also approved the changes to the constitution, implementing a political reform backed by outgoing President Kuchma as a part of a political compromise between the acting authorities and opposition. In November 2009, Yanukovych stated that although his victory in the elections was taken away, he gave up this victory in order to avoid bloodshed. "I didn't want mothers to lose the children and wives the husbands. I didn't want dead bodies from Kyiv to flow down the Dnipro. I didn't want to assume power through bloodshed." Rerun election. The 26th of December revote was held under intense scrutiny of local and international observers. The preliminary results, announced by the Central Election Commission on the 28th of December, gave Yushchenko and Yanukovych 51.99% and 44.20% of the total vote, which represented a change in the vote by plus 5.39% to Yushchenko and minus 5.27% from Yanukovych respectively when compared to the November poll. The Yanukovych team attempted to mount a fierce legal challenge to the election results using both the Ukrainian courts and the Election Commission complaint procedures. However, all the complaints were dismissed as without merit by both the Supreme Court of Ukraine and the Central Election Commission. On the 10th of January 2005, the Election Commission officially declared Yushchenko as the winner of the presidential election, with the final results falling within 0.01% of the preliminary ones. This Election Commission announcement cleared the way for Yushchenko's inauguration as the President of Ukraine. The official ceremony took place in the Verkhovna Rada building on the 23rd of January 2005 and was followed by the public inauguration of the newly sworn president at Maidan Nezalezhnosti in front of hundreds of thousands of his supporters. This event brought the Ukrainian Orange Revolution to its peaceful conclusion. Role of Ukrainian intelligence and security agencies. According to one version of events recounted by the New York Times, Ukrainian security agencies played an unusual role in the Orange Revolution, with a KGB successor agency in the former Soviet state providing qualified support to the political opposition. As per the paper report, on the 28th of November 2004, over 10,000 MVS troops were mobilized to put down the protests in Independence Square in Kiev by the order of the commander, Lt. Gen. Sergei Popkov. The SBU warned opposition leaders of the crackdown. Oleksandr Galika, head of GUR, made calls to prevent bloodshed. Kol. Gen. Ihor Smeshko and Marj. Gen. Vitaly Romanchenko both claimed to have warned Popkov to pull back his troops, which he did, preventing bloodshed. In addition to the desire to avoid bloodshed, the New York Times article suggests that Siloviki, as the security officers are often called in the countries of the former Soviet Union, were motivated by personal aversion to the possibility of having to serve President Yanukovych, who was in his youth convicted of robbery and assault and had alleged connection with corrupt businessmen, especially if he were to ascend to the presidency by fraud. The personal feelings of Gen. Smeshko towards Yanukovych may also have played a role. Additional evidence of Yushchenko's popularity and at least partial support among the SBU officers is shown by the fact that several embarrassing proofs of electoral fraud, including incriminating wiretap recordings of conversations among the Yanukovych campaign and government officials discussing how to rig the election, were provided to the Yushchenko camp. These conversations were likely recorded and provided to the opposition by sympathizers in the Ukrainian security services. According to able police, Kuchma was concerned about its reputation in the West because of lack of natural resources to finance his regime. He had to show a commitment to democracy in order to be targeted for Western financial assistance. Internet usage. Throughout the demonstrations, Ukraine's emerging internet usage was an integral part of the Orange Revolutionary process. It has even been suggested that the Orange Revolution was the first example of an internet-organized mass protest. Analysts believe that the internet and mobile phones allowed an alternative media to flourish that was not subject to self-censorship or overt control by President Kuchma and his allies, and pro-democracy activists were able to use mobile phones and the internet to coordinate election monitoring and mass protests. 2004 Ukrainian constitutional changes. As part of the Orange Revolution, the Ukrainian constitution was changed to shift powers from the presidency to the parliament. This was Alexander Moroz's price for his decisive role in winning Yushchenko the presidency. The Communists also supported these measures. These came into effect in 2006, during which Yanukovych's Party of Regions won the parliamentary election, creating a coalition government with the Socialists and the Communists under his leadership. As a result, President Viktor Yushchenko had to deal with a powerful Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych, who had control of many important portfolios. His premiership ended in late 2007 after Yushchenko had succeeded in his months-long attempt to dissolve parliament. After the election, Yanukovych's party again was the largest, but Tymoshenko's finished far ahead of Yushchenko's for second place. The Orange parties won a very narrow majority, permitting a new government under Tymoshenko, but Yushchenko's political decline continued to his poor showing in the 2010 presidential election. On the 1st of October 2010, the Constitutional Court of Ukraine overturned the 2004 amendments considering them unconstitutional. 2010 presidential election. A circuit administrative court in Kiev forbade mass actions at Maidan Nezalezhnosti from the 9th of January 2010 to the 5th of February 2010. The mayor's office had requested this in order to avoid non-standard situations during the aftermath of the 2010 presidential election. Apparently, the Party of Regions, All-Ukrainian Union, Fatherland, and Svoboda had applied for a permit to demonstrate there. Incumbent President Viktor Yushchenko got 5% of votes during the election. Ukraine is a European democratic country, said Yushchenko in a sort of political will at the polling station. It is a free nation and free people. Quote, according to him, this is one of the great achievements of the Orange Revolution. In the 2010 presidential election, Viktor Yanukovych was declared the winner, which was labeled by some Yanukovych supporters as an end to this orange nightmare. Immediately after his election, Yanukovych promised to clear the debris of misunderstanding and old problems that emerged during the years of the Orange power. According to influential Party of Regions member Anat Akhmatov, the ideals of the Orange Revolution won at the 2010 election. We had a fair and democratic independent election. The entire world recognized it, and international observers confirmed its results. That's why the ideals of the Orange Revolution won. According to Yulia Tymoshenko, the 2010 elections was a missed chance to become a worthy member of the European family and to put an end to the rule of the oligarchy.